What's up, buddy? Welcome back. Another preseason wisdom warm-up, a mini episode on how to learn. As always, I want to dedicate this episode, or as always in this series anyway, I want to dedicate this episode to my man Paul over at Three Nails Bibles. You need a Bible rebind? Give him a call, man. I would tell you how to get a hold of him, but hey, you're a classy, erudite audience. Look him up. It's well worth it. I, again, hold in my hand the kangaroo leather Bible that he made for me, and I love this thing so much. Now, this particular episode of How to Learn is going to talk about more the processing side, not so much how to take in information, but how to make sure that you learn something from the information you're taking in, right? Because we've all been to school. We all know that you can read something and then get done with it and be like, I have no idea what I just read. Or, you know, we could read something, pass a test, and then a week later you don't remember it. And the reason for that is because we don't care, right? Which, I mean, in school, you have to interact with a lot of information that doesn't really interest you all that much. And school really isn't, you know, a lot of it, at least in primary school, it's not even really about the information. It's about how to learn, right? And so, like, they don't care if you memorize this guy's name and what date he died and whatever, but you need to be able to take in, process, and retain information long enough to be able to do the same thing out in the working world when you got to learn a whole new skill at a competitive rate to, and perform to a standard, or else your job is on the line or somebody gets hurt or whatever. So it's about how to learn, right? And sometimes, like, we're not told that. In fact, I would venture to say almost never are we told that. And I was never told this because, I was never told this by my teachers. My parents told me this, but I didn't listen to them, or I didn't get the way that they were telling me, or, I mean, something. But what happened with me was I was always terrible at math. I did have a little surge there in 7th grade where I tested out 2 years ahead of where I was supposed to be. So I wound up in 9th grade math and 7th grade, and then like it was a terrible idea. I don't know if the test was poorly written or if I had just eaten my Wheaties that day, but anyway, something happened where I was in a math class I shouldn't have been. And so because of that, my parents thought I was good at math or something. I don't know. Maybe I assumed I was really good at it deep down. It's like, I'm just lazy, but I'm actually good at this. So anyway, I take my my college entry exams, and I did good on English because, language is my thing. And, I did good on whatever else I had to test out on, but I bombed math. I got placed into remedial children's, addition and subtraction or whatever it was. I don't know. I got placed into some ridiculous math class that probably was right about the right level for me. But, I bombed it. But in those tests, in those placement tests, you got 2 chances to take the test. So I'm like, okay, I have 2 weeks now to learn math. I got to come back and test into college math, and I've always been terrible at math, and even when I placed well in math, I bombed the class. I have 2 weeks to learn math. How am I going to pull this off? So I'm driving home, and I got my first speeding ticket that day because I wasn't paying attention to how fast I was going, and I was doing 70 and a 60. Cop pulled me over, bada boom. Learned that lesson, even though I didn't learn math. But I got home, and I was thinking about it. I'm like, okay, how do you... Like learning math, just cracking open textbooks and processing them is not obviously going to work. I have 2 weeks. I have to learn 12 years of information in 2 weeks. What do I do? And so I thought I need a different approach. Got to have a different approach. And that's when it hit me that, this isn't about the information. This is about how to process information. They want to know if I can problem solve. Oh, so this isn't a math problem. This is a problem. So I thought, okay, here's how I'm going to approach this. And I kind of developed this, over the course of the next day. I'm thinking, okay, I may not understand the mathematics of all of this, but I understand people. And somebody wrote that problem. And somebody, when they wrote that, they knew what they were doing, and it was a language that made sense to them, right? And so when they were typing this out, they were saying, yes, and I understand this, and I understand this, and the natural answer would be that. And so all I had to do was catch on to the logic of the person who wrote the thing, because they weren't writing gibberish, they weren't writing nonsense, they were writing something sensical. I just had to crack into their brain and sort of figure out what it was that they were thinking. And so I'm like, okay, I know people, even though I don't know math, let's go back and take the test. I didn't say it this way at the time, but it was like, let's take the test anthropologically instead of mathematically, right? So I went in there thinking everything makes sense to someone. Everything makes sense to someone. And so I sat down and I said, okay, somebody wrote this test. What did they know? This made sense to them. And I cracked into the logic of it. And I placed into a math class that was so far out of my league that I was like, dude, check this out. I got placed into this crazy, rocket science 501 or whatever it was, So I show up. I register for the class. I show up the first day, and I literally was wondering at times, like, is this woman speaking English? I had no clue what I was talking about. These guys had all kinds of prereqs and whatever, and I'm like, I'm out of here. So I don't even think I stayed for the whole class. I was like, I've made a terrible mistake, and I went down to the registrar, whoever it is, that helps you with your classes, and I was like, I need to be dumber than this because I just need to conform with reality. So take me out of this class. So she did. But the point there is, I was shooting at the wrong target when I was talking about learning. And as we're doing these little episodes on how to learn, it's worth saying, like, you got to learn in the way that's best for you, not in the way that people assume that you're going to learn. You can approach a data set or a set of information differently than the people assume you're going to when they lay it out. And that's fine. Be creative about it, right? So when you're talking about taking in information in the world, let's just say reading books, okay? That's kind of a baseline, like, hey, how do you get information? Read a book. But, I mean, this is true of, watching YouTube videos, listening to podcasts, conversations with people, all that stuff I recommended in the last episode. When you're taking in information, you want to translate it to something that is manageable for you, okay? Now, let me give you a tip on this, and this may not be exactly the right tip for everybody, but broad spectrum, this is going to help most people because most people work in a certain way. And the way that we work is we are relational, right? So we remember conversations, don't we? I mean, if you think of like, and I'll talk more about this and how to memorize the Bible, but if you think about people that, don't have two brain cells to rub together, they can tell you about the conversations that they've had with this famous person or, the fight that they had with their girlfriend or whatever. We remember our relational interactions. And so if you can take this information that's in this book, let's say, and turn it into relational interaction, then it'll stick in your brain and it'll sink down to a level of understanding that you wouldn't have if you were just, taking in data. So one way to do that is to argue with the author, right? Whatever the author is saying. Now, I'm assuming that we're reading nonfiction here, that the author is making a statement. We'll talk about, how to do this with fiction, with novels and stuff in another episode. But let's say that you're reading some nonfiction, you're reading something for informational purposes, not for, storyline and stuff. You want to see what statement this author is making, and then you want to argue with it. Even if you agree. If you agree with the author, just argue with it anyway, right? And just say, what would the counterpoints be? If I were to craft an argument against this, where would I start? How would I structure it? What points would I pick up on? What points did the author make that are not really all that important? How would I argue with this? And then that turns it into a social interaction, and it goes to a place in your brain that's very primary, a place that that develops, first as we are children, right? We form relational bonds and connections and stuff very early on, and we start flexing those muscles. So use them, right? Let your brain turn the book into a social interaction, and you'll develop a level of understanding that's on par with something that that you understand coming away from a good conversation, rather than just a book that you had to plow through, right? So how to approach a book, I'll talk about that again in another episode. But all I'm saying right now is read a book. Or again, whatever, podcast episode, something like that. And then argue with it and just say, okay, the author of this book is sitting down right in front of me, and I'm going to say, I disagree. I think you're wrong. Well, based on what? Okay, what's your case? Lay it out for him and just push and see what happens. And you may find out that, like, yeah, I don't have a really good case, and this person was right. Well, now you know, and it's going to stick. Or you may find out, you know what, there are some holes in that person's case. I think I actually disagree with this author. By the way, that's a really liberating experience too, because we assume that when people write books, they're smart. And sometimes that's true. Usually that's true. Sometimes not so much. And so it's really liberating it feels good in some ways to sit back and say, I think I disagree with this author, and I think I could win an argument to that effect. Because then you feel like you can compete in the intellectual arena where guys are getting published, And even if that's not true, I could never write a book, man. I tried once, and I'm just a bad author. I'm just not good at writing. I'm a talker, not a writer. They're very different disciplines. They're very different skill sets and all of that. And I've got one, and I don't have the other. So, I couldn't write a book to refute this book that I disagree with. Can't do it. But if I can square off on the battlefield of ideas and say, yeah, this author says this, but I'm really thinking that he maybe missed this or didn't give enough credence to that, or I really like these points of his argument, and I would adopt those in a heartbeat, and things like that. You are going to learn a lot. And the other thing that's true about this is that you're going to learn more than was written, right? You're not just going to be taking in the information from the book. You're going to be processing the information, adding your voice to it, adding your analysis to it, and then you're going to learn about yourself. You're going to learn about ideas that you have that are maybe different than what the majority world has. That stuff that makes you special. That stuff that makes you you, right? You're going to be able to articulate those things even better because you'll get these reps in. And then as you as you have the rough edges knocked off of your thought by being challenged with books and everything, you'll get comfortable and familiar with that process. You'll develop a framework and a grid for processing information, and it'll come easier and easier and easier. Before you know it, it'll be second nature to dialogue with a book rather than just read a book. And it's so much more meaningful that way. So how do you learn? Argue with an author. Argue with a podcast episode, a podcast host or whatever. But if you turn it into a social interaction, then you're going to find that even the stuff that you normally wouldn't care about becomes a little more interesting. That's another thing that I learned around that same time in life, is that almost anything is interesting if you learn enough about it. Because there's some stuff that I just do not care about, just subjects. I'm like, I'm uninterested. And some of them people are very passionate about, like, yeah, but you got to do this and the other thing. And if you don't understand this, then you're a terrible person. And I'm like, I'm willing to risk being a terrible person just to not hear you talk about that subject anymore. I just don't care. For example, fashion. I don't care, man. It's not, there's nothing wrong with, loving fashion and clothing design and whatever. And I really appreciate that my wife has taste when it comes to clothes that I don't have, because otherwise I'd leave the house looking like Andre 3000 and Stevie Wonder in the 60s, got together and picked out a wardrobe or something. So, I'm fine with other people doing that. I don't think that there's a moral or a character deficiency in loving fashion. I just don't. I don't care about it. Now, how can that be interesting? Well, if you learn more about it, if you learn how the human body works and how it moves in certain situations and the decisions that these fashion designers, I'm just making this up on the fly, right? But like the decisions that these fashion designers have to make in order to accommodate this person who's going to move like that in these situations. And if the person's body type is A, then when they sit down, then their hips are going to do that, and those pants are going to have to, compensate like this. If the person's body type is B, then when they lift up their arms, you don't want the shirt coming up too high to expose the skin above the belt. So you got to do something with the armpit that's like that. And it really becomes like this kind of anthropological study of like, how is the human body constructed? Now it's a science thing. Now it's science and art, and there's creativity, but there's absolutes that you got to navigate to get there. And it becomes a puzzle, and it becomes a problem to solve. And then beyond that, that's all objective stuff. And then you've got the subjective stuff of like, does it look good? And I don't know why it is in the fashion shows that everybody puts on stuff that's so weird. Like, in what world am I going to need to know what that girl's going to look like with a peacock tail coming out from behind her walking down the street? It ain't never going to happen. Like, maybe it's just a thing to show off these guys' creativity or something. It is completely over my head. I'm lost on it. Excuse me, man. I had some chicken strips. I think the breading is getting stuck. Anyway, so the point here is I'm talking about fashion now as if I'm interested in it, because for a second there, while I was thinking about it from those angles, I kind of was. For the last 30 seconds, I've almost been interested in fashion design. And that's enough to get me through a conversation with somebody. That's enough for me to see somebody's job or the world or a cross-section of the world in a different way than I ever have before. So, anything can be interesting if you learn enough about it. And a lot of stuff only needs to be interesting for a short amount of time in order for you to interact with some ideas, gain some information, have a good conversation with somebody over a cup of coffee, and then boom, you're out. You don't have to care about it anymore. But that's going to work, man. So let's review this. Basically, everything makes sense to someone, right? So if you can tap into their line of thinking, then you can see where they're coming from and understand their perspective, all right? If you can turn a piece of information into a social interaction, 95% of people are going to enjoy it more and learn more from it than you would otherwise. So how do you learn? You turn it into a social interaction, because almost every human brain is good at that. There are some exceptions because people are individuals, but that works for most people. And then also just keep in mind that whatever you're looking at, this is interesting to somebody. And so if you learn enough about it, if you see it from enough different angles, you'll find something interesting about it. And interesting things stick. So make things interesting and you learn about them. We'll see you on the next one.